So, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, and assembled company, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe, and it is Monday night, so we are connecting the world by story. And out of Monday nights, we tend to explore a topic, and the other week we did bringing history alive through story, and it went down really well. And Jan, for instance, made some very positive comments, and we like that. And and other people besides Jan made very positive comments about it. So we've invited two of our speakers back. Well, we invited them all back, but David Thompson in Austin is working at a polling station and making, doing civic stuff, doing his civic duty. So he couldn't be with us. So but we do have Claire and Baba C, who's become a cafe regular ever since Baden Prince introduced him to me. Baden has a lot to answer for in his life, but this is one of the good. This is one of the good things. There's all good people that Baden's introduced me to, and hopefully Dave Tong will be joining us if the National Health Service hasn't grabbed him for test and trace purposes, because he's working on weird shifts doing all that stuff. But Claire tells me her internet is a bit iffy. So while she's there, because if you make people wait, you come to them and it's one of those moments. Oh, Dave is with us, bless his heart.
I'm so sorry I'm late. I lost track of time. I really am.
Look, don't say that. I've been telling people the important work you've been doing for the country, and now you've blown it by just saying I got late. Anyway, Claire's being a regular old cafe now. Thank you for that, Baba C. He's put a comment on for those that can't see the comments. Does being a regular make me caffeinated? Well, I think
I don't think that was called for. I think that was kind of, that's going up a level. That's
yeah. We don't do intellectual jokes.
That was intellectual.
Yeah, well, we've got a kind of low, our baseline is, anyway. Less of all this waffling on before Claire got all internet will collapse on us if I natter too much. So, Claire, would you like to start us off? Start the topic off.
Well, it's again the historical.
We are bringing history alive through story.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think with this, I think is that it's very easy to do it, to get focused on one way of doing it. I think the way you bring history alive through storytelling is where you want to, and the way somebody else does it is going to be different, because you've got to bring your own bit of magic to it. And for instance, I do enjoy really finding out the nuances of the story in the historical time, and I like to try and bring that out, but that's not the only way to do it. And I think it's very important not to get caught up in how somebody else is trying to bring ancient stories to life. And you can be inspired by other people doing it. Think, oh, that's a really good idea, but think that that's not me. I want to do it differently. And I think it's very important to not be ashamed to be different from somebody else who's really good. And you're thinking, I'm different, but that's not bad. I really get a joy if I can have a really in-depth discussion with somebody about the social structures of the Greeks at the time of the Iliad. And I love a lovely chat about that. And we can geek out on about how when Agamemnon takes the prize away from Achilles. There's nothing he can do to give Achilles that status back, because he's reduced that status, and there is no mechanism for him to say, I'm sorry, I didn't, here's your status back, because he's reduced him. And that's where all the disaster comes from. It's such a serious thing. And I had a lovely chat with people about really these detailed kind of things. And you find that discussion becomes very lively, but there's probably someone next door who would be so bored by it. And I think it's finding the story and the means for the group you're in, and finding if you can, there's another way of doing it, and think, well, these people here, they're not going to be interested in that, but they might be interested in the costume, and they might be interested in other forms of the way of life, or they might just want a good story. And you're trying the idea that old stories have still got a bit of verve to them, and it's not getting wedded to one way of doing it, in my opinion. I think that's a very important idea, that you look what's going on and you start cherry picking other people's really good ideas, bring them into how you do it, but don't copy them, if you see what I mean. It's being inspired rather than copying.
I like that as a start, you know, and that connection with the audience. Taffy Thomas always goes, you know, and we both use the same cheap trick. We find Taffy used a cheap trick, perish the thought. That we look at the audience and we find a line that connects with them. You know, we refer. Doesn't matter what the story is. We refer to someone in the audience, and that brings everyone with you. And it, you know, kind of stop. But that individual way. Have you got a story? Could you give an example? Tell us a story, Claire. Just a short story in your own inimitable way.
Shall I tell you one of my favorites? It's possibly a really silly story, but I love this story, and it's one of those things. It's there once was a fox, because all the best stories have foxes in them. And this fox happened to find himself down the bottom of a steep, deep well. We don't know how the fox got there, but the fox couldn't get out, because the steep, deep well was far deeper and steeper than the fox could jump. And there was water in the bottom, but that was all. No one knew where the fox was, and he didn't know what was going to happen to him. And he was thinking, what's going to become of me? Nobody knows where I am. The well's steep and deep. And suddenly at the top of the well, there was a little voice. Hello, fox. And the fox looked up. And at the top of the well, looking down, was a goat. And the fox said, hello, goat. And the goat said, hello, fox. Is the water nice? Is it tasty? Is it sweet? Is it nice down there? And the fox said, yeah, the water's great. The water's lovely. I am not going to die of thirst down this steep, deep well. And the goat said, great, and jumped right down. And the fox could not believe his foxy eyes. Goat, you just jumped down a steep, deep well. Did you look before you left? Was there any looking before there was leaping? And the goat, oh, this water's really, really, really good. Oh, but see, I'm not much of a looker, really. I'm very, very much a leaper, said the goat. But now you come to mention it, how do you get out? And the goat. And the fox said, goat, I was stuck down a steep, deep well. I was stuck, and you have just jumped. Did you do any looking? There was no looking. There was lots of leaping. There was no looking. But said the goat, fox, you're a fox. You must know a way to get out of a well. And the fox said, I know, goat. If you put your hind legs down, your front legs against the wall of the well, I can run up your back, and I'm sure a little fox like me can get a big goat like you out of a steep, deep well. And the goat said, that sounds like a terrific plan. And so the goat put his little front legs off the side of the wall, and the fox ran up his back and was just able to get his little paws on the edge of the well and scramble out. At the top of the well, the fox looked down and said, well, thank you, goat. I'm really glad you came. I was in a bit of a fix there, but I've got to go. Places to see, people to do. You know what it's like. And the goat says, Fox, you were going to get me out of the steep deep well. I'm in it. I'm stuck. And the fox says, go. How is a little fox going to get a big goat out of a steep, deep well? I don't even have opposable thumbs. I'm really sorry, but I've got to go. Bye, says the goat. It's true. There's no way a little goat get a little fox get a big goat out of a steep deep well. Next time I will look before I leave. And the reason I told that story is you go into this story and you start off by saying this is thousands and thousands of years old. And then it says the phrase look before you leap that everyone's heard of and they've no idea where it's come from. And you're telling a story that's thousands and thousands of years old, that's a silly story about a fox and a goat and uses a phrase they all know. And suddenly that distance comes together. It's not a story that's thousands of years old. It's a story that could have been written yesterday.
But there are stories like that, 1,000 years. Yeah, round of applause for that story. And of course, if you've been stuck in a classroom, you know, some teacher says you can have money if you bring History Alive for my 6-year-olds, and you're thinking you got to be crazy. And then, you know, what you really want to do as a storyteller with those 6-year-olds is to come in with a story like that, so they're rocking on the story and they're loving the stories. But I'd take one, I mean, this is me, I'd just take that one well in the story, because if I was in Washington, D.C., like Bubba C right now, how many of the kids and the schools you go to in Washington, D.C. have a well in, you know, in the apartment?
Well, not in the apartment, but a couple of my students do have wells on their property, because some of my students between us,
I think in America, a lot of
they
people
go
have
to
wells
DC school.
because
Why
not in the big cities. Not in the big cities, but in the suburbs. But what I'd say is that some of the kids I've had in D.C., just between us, they didn't live in D.C., and their property had wells.
But
which is where we get the expression, well, no, it isn't.
Yeah, so I'll go to you, Dave. I mean, Bubba C has brilliantly sidestepped that question, for which he needs a round of applause. But hey, Dave, you're sitting there, and you come down from Norwich to London because people gave you some money.
Yeah.
And
nice.
And yeah, it'd be good, wouldn't it? And so you're in London and you're telling this story now up in Norwich, because you know they're a bit backward there, so everywhere's got wells.
Yeah, I thought we were down in Norwich, but that's another story. Go on, carry on.
Go. No, I go
sideways in Norwich. You're sideways.
I go downtown. No, that's Ipswich, isn't it? Where you go downtown. There's so I just use the well and sort of talk about, I might talk. It's one of those, you know, I mean, what the great thing about stories is that, especially in schools, is that it's a multidisciplinary thing. So you could talk about, you could talk about, you know, where people got their water historically. You could use it in geography. You could talk about water shortages. You could talk about areas of the world where, you know, where you couldn't just turn on a tap and the water comes out.
You could even bring in things like fracking if you wanted to, about how that affects well water.
But the thing I think as well is, I think if again, it comes down to what we said last week about people underestimate the importance of an introduction to a story. Those things that you want to introduce are a bit complicated, whatever that would be for kids. I mean, things like religion, whatever that would be. I mean, we're very lucky with the curriculum, history curriculum here, in the fact that younger people will deal with nice, big, broad themes like rich and poor and the differences. And if you start talking about the kids, what they've got at home, they can have, some will still have a fire. Some will still warm themselves by a fire. Not that often, but they do. Some will have a pump sometimes. If they're well off living in Suffolk, well, mummy and daddy have a pump. They won't necessarily use it, but and you find out what I always start when I do stuff with kids, finding out what they know anyway, and that's your talking point to tell them about stuff they don't know, so there's ways in, and then you bring it in the story. But the other thing is, I think, and I'm going to touch when I talk about a bit of my storytelling process, is you can mention archaic language, you can mention things they don't know about, as long as you set them in context, because it's in the context of the story that they'll understand what you're talking about anyway. And as I say, one of the things they do in Rich and Poor is what we have now in our houses, what they had long ago. And it's again what I said about last week about finding relates. So you can talk about something long ago, as long as you find it a way of relating it to what they have now, whatever that.
Well, I came unstuck in America when I with Mossico, which is a gypsy version of Cinderella, a Romany. It was collected from an English Romany gypsy about 1915. Now, in that, the skillet is really important. Now, it was quite early on in my storytelling career, so I thought, no one will know what a skillet is. And I didn't want to break up the story by explaining it, so I changed it to a pan. It worked for the story. I saw a saucepan. I changed it for a saucepan. I know it's inaccurate and it's more a frying pan, but it worked. Saucepan worked for the story. I got to Texas, and the kids hadn't the faintest idea what a saucepan is, but they all knew what a skillet was.
Yes. See, you were in the southern part of the United States, and the further south you go, skillet is almost mandatory for you to have in your kitchen. Is a skillet, at least 2 skillets, cast iron skillets.
Cast iron.
Actually, I'll give you an example of that. Things like words that American now, we assume American, like trash. We don't use them anymore. However, when I was doing my studies, and I was going through some inventories in Norwich, probate inventory. So when someone died, they'd list what they got from room to room, so you can reconstruct a house just by looking at the inventory. And it was a big old house in Norwich, and they finally got, and in the courtyard, piles of wood and other old trash. That's the first time I'd ever seen that word used over here, but that was being used at the end of the 1500s, was in common usage. But of course, we don't use it. But in America, it's still used. So in actual fact, I'd have more success with my Tudor stories in America. Over there.
If you don't change,
what do you use if you don't use trash? You have rubbish?
Rubbish. Use rubbish.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rubbish.
It's
rubbish
like
garbage.
It's like the other day I was
talking. It's more rubbish than garbage. Garbage comes
it's
across as a bit of Americanism as well.
Yeah. I
think garbage in America is mostly food stuff, leftover food stuff. But until we started recycling, garbage and trash was kind of combined together. But if we say like trash, we're talking about
all of those words, especially you associate with before. All of those things were in common usage. They went over to America, and we forgot about them, but they remained in the States.
It's also faucet as well is a very old word which we don't use anymore.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Bryson's mother tongue is a really, shows how that Tudor stuff stayed in the but there's modern stuff that disappears, and there's just words that may be common to us. Kids haven't the face of petticoat.
Yeah,
petticoats turn up in stories all over the place. So I've developed just a way of stopping.
Yeah, nobody wears petticoats anymore.
But they don't.
Well,
but in America,
I do.
we talk about petticoats.
If he stood up, you'd see John is wearing a very pretty one now, but he's not going to stand up, are you, mate?
No.
In America, if you say petticoat, I would dare say anybody under 40, no, under 30 would not know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But you
They
see,
would just
I would
think you're
start a conversation with kids. I would say, "Does anyone know what a petticoat was? Can anyone guess what it is?"
Yeah.
You know, and
I do that all the time.
yeah, exactly.
I start off with Chanticleer and the fop, checking people know what a cockerel is, because not everyone knows what a cockerel is.
Yeah.
And you actually sometimes get into quite a nice little chat about the cockerel before anything else starts, and it's quite nice. And
The American
people make animal noises.
Hold on, because Bill Bryson gives an explanation why cockerel is not used in America as a word, because it was when they changed it to rooster because it was because cockerel was sounded far too much like a cock, and so during the puritanical times, everyone thinks of puritanical language being with Victorians, but actually it's much more language get puritanized a little bit more over the ocean than so rooster. So if you
I sent someone a package of cock flavored soup. It has a big rooster on it, but 4 out of the 5 Americans I shared with it, they were like, "What? Why would you?" And they're not looking at the rooster, you know. But yeah, and there are certain words in stories that I have to change because of local dialects or you know, like I don't use the word cockerel. I have a story where I talk about pussycat, but in some places I can't say pussycat because all the kids here is pussy. So I have to change it to kitten. Which,
I got in trouble down south for that in the Texas way again. I was in a predominantly African American school in Austin, and I was telling a Jack story, and I used him as a fool. I described fool. I said, "Jack, you fool," and the teacher took me aside and said, "We don't use fool as the word because." People, say it's there's a taboo about it.
And
it varies because it's not straight across the board in America, but there are certain words. And that's why I have try to be aware of the locality and the language they use in the locality, and then sometimes I just explain a word in the midst of telling the story because there are certain words that you don't use in certain areas, like the example with pussycat. I was telling that story for years until I hit this one school district, and I said pussycat, and the kids would either break out laughing or go, "Oh," in the same school district. So in that school district, I turned it to kitten or cat. No, I couldn't say cat because I had the same kind of
But there's really
why
modern...
couldn't you say cat? I mean, what was wrong with
because,
cat? You wanted a young cat.
Because cat in certain areas in America, cat is another word for a lady's part.
Oh, really?
But moving that on very quickly, one thing I will say, because this I picked up on this thing fool here in England occasionally, and that's where archaic language can come in because there are lots of words like ninny hammer, dullard that kids really love. That actually, if you call someone a ninny hammer, you don't really have to explain that for children.
I'm going to one more word, and then I'm coming to Dave. That's a really good introduction because of how you've grabbed this. But what I was really, I mean, again with Jack's story, you know, loads of stories where butchers come into it. And if you're with young kids, they haven't the faintest idea what a butcher is. So now I just throw it in the Sainsbury's is a supermarket. I'm saying this for Baba's benefit. I just say, well, it depends which sort of area.
It's also very interesting. Mannerisms are changing.
Absolutely, but with butcher, I just say it's where you got your meat before Sainsbury's, or You know, in my case,
Yeah.
Littles, but your parents might go to Waitrose, so
Yes.
but
Actually, we really need to do more stories about the difference between Littles and Waitrose.
absolutely. Now, I love that was I'm going to bring in Barbara after Dave, but Dave, how you use how you've researched all these old words and use them in your storytelling, that because I mean it's not only good on the history front, gives kids the sense that words are fun.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to put your thoughts, David, on bringing stories alive through history. Over to you.
You know, this is lovely. This
and if while Dave's doing his big speech, if we can all mute, then we don't get extra sounds and stuff.
You will hear a bit of sound from me because I've got to have the door open tonight because I'm thoroughly unprepared. So I have the door, I'd let the light, but I'm next to a railway line, so you will hear the railway trains occasionally. Anyway, moving on very quick. This ties in very well. I thought what I'd talk about very briefly is my process and how I adapt. And, because the story I told last week was a story from history, but of course, all our folk tales they all go back long, long ago, but it's what we do to them to give them that authenticity sometimes, because I tend to look for tales in their very early versions. I'll give you an example of this. I'm researching a book of trickster tales at the minute, which means I'm going through all my old collection of books. And there's one called Beneath the Cherry Chaplet. I'll say that again. Beneath the Cherry Sapling, Legends from Franconia, all from Tudor times, all first printed. And I was going through it to see if I could find a trickster tale. I couldn't, but at the very back, I'd marked a story that I'd worked up ages ago. And in the book, it's literally 4 lines. It's an anecdote. And that's the beauty. If you go back to collections like this is one called Medieval Comic Tales, all you get is a paragraph, and that's your story. Now, of course, we can always take a longer story and strip it back. But of course, if you find them in their earlier stages, you don't have to. So whether it's a little anecdote like that or whether it's a longer story, what I do to start off with is I strip it back to 4 or 5 basic points that I want the story, that I want to have in the story, regardless of what I do with it. So say any story I tell, I break it down to 4, this happened, this happened, this happened, and this happened. So I strip it down to its skeleton, but then I flesh it out again. And the fleshing out is the important bit to me, because it's then that I can add all of that historical detail. I can add those archaic words. I can add all of that stuff I like. Now, I'm very lucky when it comes to the archaic stuff, in that I spent ages going through court records as part of my MA and that. So I got steeped into the language. But you can actually get this stuff yourself, because actually, if you go to a charity shop, you'll find collections of old court records. Things like the Paston letters are really good. That's a collection of medieval letters that a Paston lady wrote to her husband and her sons in London, that deal with all sorts of lovely stuff. So she might ask for certain types of goods to be brought back. So you can find out the value of things. You can find out old names for things. So that's fine. But as well as that, there's all the historical detail. Now, I was looking, just bear with me, talk amongst yourselves.
We can't, we're muted.
No, I was typing something for Baba's benefit there. When Dave said charity shop, that's a thrift shop.
No, yeah.
Is a charity shop the same as a thrift shop, though?
I
thought thrift shop weren't raising money for a charity. Am I wrong?
Oh, no, but they're usually local charities.
Yeah, and some of them are non-profits, and some of them are profits, but you have to read the fine line. Because one store got in trouble because they bought the space that used to be a non-profit, but they kept the name, and someone discovered that they were selling things without giving it to charity. They were keeping the profits. So, but in general, a thrift store is more or less like what you would call a charity shop. And sometimes we have specified ones called Goodwill, which is run by an organization called Goodwill.
There you go. You see?
Yeah, because charity shops.
If you go to a charity shop over here, you might find things like this. This guy is called R.J. Unstead. You can't see it. And this guy was writing books for children in the 50s and 60s in schools. And that's when they treated kids with a little bit more intelligence they do sometimes now with the books. Because, like, for example, he does Iron Age, he goes right through, and this one's on monasteries. And anything, if you wanted to know, if you were doing a story about monks, anything that you wanted to know, none of us are experts in these things, you would find in here. So the various orders of the day when it came to prayers, whatever, the different types of monks there were, anything you'd find in there. So now coming back to what I was saying, so I've got my 5 points. So what I do then is I then picture the different people, the different characters. Now, some of this stuff won't actually find its way into the story. Some of it will just be a reservoir that I can draw on for my introductions to stories. So I think, what does this person look like? What's their house like? Sight, sound, smells. Some of that will go into the story when I tell it. Other bits won't, but it'll be there in my head should I want to change the story. And the more you do this, the more it becomes innate in when you adapt your stories, that you start thinking about what you add and what flavors you add and what words you add. And so coming back to that story in that book I found, it was 4 lines it was. But would you like me to tell you the version I tell now so you can get a sense of how you can work out the story from just 4 lines? Right, very quickly, because I know we've got lots to get through. There was once a girl who looked a bit like, oh, I've got a few girls here, haven't I? Do you know what? I'm going to say Teresa, yeah? Except she didn't come out on high days and holidays. She didn't sit in front of a computer all day long, but she was too busy working on her father's few meager strips of land. And she worked hard. She worked from dawn when the sun comes up to dusk when the moon takes over. Her father could not help. He had been punished for being stealing in a king's woods. He'd lost an eye, he'd lost a hand. Her grandfather couldn't help, for he was old, he was blind, and he could not see. And her mother couldn't help, because she spent all of her time spinning long bits of wool into long, thin thread that would be woven into cloth that would be cut and stitched into fair and fine clothes that she would never, ever be able to afford. And so, as I said, the young woman worked hard till dusk. And now it was dusk. The sun was going down, the moon was taking over, and as she made ready to leave the fields, a mist formed around her feet. A mist that began to boil and bubble, bubble and boil, for it began to rise up in front of the girl until it took the shape of a man. But not just any man, for it took the shape of a monk. Once a man of prayer, once a man of care, once a man of joy and song, but no longer, for he was dead. He was a ghostly monk, a monk who was a ghost. In one hand, he held a great iron key. In the other, he held a lantern. Now, he must have put the lantern down, because now he beckoned the girl, saying, "Follow me, come girl, for I shall lead you to great treasure." And so the girl, she followed him into the darkness. She followed him into the night. Well, they walked and they walked and they walked and they walked. And as they walked, thorn and thistle tore at the skirts of the girl, tore at the flesh of her bare legs. But neither thorn nor thistle touched the ghostly habit, the gown of the monk, as he hovered above the surface of the land. Well, they walked and they walked and they walked until they came to a wide but shallow stream, and the girl was forced to hitch up her skirts and tread carefully across, lest she fall in the icy water and soak herself. But the ghostly monk, the monk who was a ghost, he simply hovered above the surface of that stream. Well, they walked and they walked until they came to the ruins of a priory, once a place where monks lived, once a place of prayer, once a place of care, once a place of joy and song, but no longer, for it was in ruins. It was stripped of its wealth by a greedy king called Henry VIII. And you've all heard of Henry VIII, have you not? Big man, many wives, but not all at the same time. He'd stripped it of its wealth. Well, the ghostly monk, the monk who was a ghost, he led the girl across the priory ground to some low trees. And through the low trees was set a great stone wall. Set within the stone wall was a large wooden door. Set within the wooden door was a large iron lock. The ghostly monk, the monk who was a ghost, he took the iron key from his belt. He turned it in the lock. There was a clunk. And slowly the door creaked open. Now, at this point, I'd get you all to do a creaky door because I can't do them, but we haven't got a lot of time. So we'll take it as read. It was a creaky door. The door creaked open. And even though it was still dark outside, the girl could make out something sparkling and glittering in the room beyond. For in the room beyond the door was treasure. There was gold, there was silver, there were jewels. The girl walked into the chamber, closely followed by the monk. He set the iron key upon a bench and he spoke these words. He said, "Take whatever you will, but remember, girl, you must take that which is best. Be sure to take that which is best." Quite spooky. Well, the girl thought, "I do not know that which is best, but I do not think there's anything better than silver coins." Having no sack, she lifted up the front of her dress and she began to rake the silver coins in. And as she did, she began to dream of how she would spend them upon her father. She thought, with these silver coins, I shall buy my father meat. No longer shall he eat a pottage, a simple soup of pea and bean. He shall eat venison, and he shall drink sack wine, wine that's been flavored with sugar and honey. No more small beer, no more weak ale for him. And as she dreamt her dreams, she continued to rake the silver coins in. But as she did, the ghostly monk, the monk who was a ghost, he spoke again. He said, "Take whatever you will, but remember, girl, you must take that which is best. Be sure to take that which is best." Well, the girl thought, "I do not know that which is best, but I do not think there's anything better than gold coins." And she began to rake the gold coins into her apron. And as she did, she began to dream of how she would spend them upon her grandfather. She thought, with these gold coins, I shall buy the old man a bed. No longer shall he lie upon the hard earth floor. No longer shall he have a wooden log as a bolster, as a pillow. He shall have a soft feather mattress. He shall have a feather mattress placed upon a carved oak bed. And as she dreamt her dreams of carved oak beds, she continued to rake the gold coins in. But as she did, the ghostly monk, the monk who was a ghost, he spoke a third time. He said, "Take whatever you will, but remember, girl, you must take that which is best. Be sure to take that which is best." The girl thought, "I do not know that which is best, but I do not think there's anything better than jewels." And so she began to rake the diamonds, the rubies, the emeralds into her dress. And as she did, she began to dream of how she would spend them upon her mother. She thought, with these jewels, I shall buy my mother a new dress. I shall buy her 100 new dresses. I shall buy her 1,000 new dresses, just like good Queen Bess, just like Queen Elizabeth, for she is said to have 1,000 dresses at least. No longer shall she wear coarse woolen rags, homespun as they call it now. She shall wear velvet. She shall wear silk, and it will be stitched with threads of silver and gold. And as she dreamt her dreams of threads of silver and gold, she continued to rake the jewels in. And as she did, the ghostly monkey spoke again. He said, "Take whatever you will, girl, but remember this, you must take that which is best." But the girl's dress was already full. And so, with a dress full of treasure and a head full of dreams, slowly she staggered out of the chamber. But no sooner did she walk out into the moonlight, no sooner did she walk without than the treasure disappeared. So too the ghostly monk and the door behind her, because she had not taken that which was best. She had left the best behind. Well, as being a story, this is also a riddle. Because can anyone here tell me that which was best, that which she should have taken, but did not? Come on, put your hand up if you're clever. Come on, John, you're no fool.
Well, I know yeah, I am, but
Yeah, no,
I'd have taken the key so I could have gone back whenever I wanted.
That's exactly the answer. The key to this riddle is very simple. But had she taken that old rusty key, she could have gone back to that chamber again and again and again. And so, a word to the wise: do not be blinded by your greed. And there, that tale ends. And so that was the story from 4 lines.
Now, we got to know what those 4 lines were, Dave. You can't just leave us hanging.
Do you know, I was trying to find the book and I couldn't find it. But the point is, you know, all of a sudden you can put stuff about monks in there. You can bring kings in there. You can bring, you know, old words. I mean, I use things, just words like coin, which aren't particularly archaic, but they're not used a lot today. But they just take you out of the here and now, back to then. And as long as you remember that not everyone knows those words, and perhaps you throw in another word to set the context, you can do it. You can put those words in there. You know, they're there just for.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not being afraid of using words you're pretty sure your audience doesn't know what they are, but then make sure that in the context of the story they becomes obvious. I mean, it's how you learn a new language.
Yeah, but there's another way. And I'm going to say, sorry, Claire, to say that, yeah, just to make sure that you set the context, but also say those other words in the story as well, because that actually adds rhythm to your story. So if you say, you know, that he was going to be paid lots of coin, money from it, if you add extra words.
If you do the thing of 3.
Yeah, exactly.
3.
Money,
I mean, that you can do it in song as well. That's always a thing, but it's not being but there's also is that your audience don't look down on your audience. Your audience might be really quite interested in learning new words, and especially often children like new words they've never heard before and are quite interested in what that word is, and rather than being frightened by new words, are intrigued by it. So archaic words, especially if they're a beautiful sounding word. I don't know, plinth, I think, is a lovely sounding word. And it's worth kind of using just to have beauty of word. And if you think, well, are they going to know what a plinth is?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure if I talk about a plinth, they'll pick
wonderful words like woebegone and all sorts. They just add flavour.
And widdershins. Widdershins is a great word.
Yeah.
Oh,
I interject a lot of Swahili in the stories that I tell, and through the actions of when I'm using the words, the kids can often infer what the meanings are.
Yeah.
But sometimes I do a lot of call and response. So I'll tell them. So he went to the Kijiji. That means village. What does it mean? And they'll say village. I said, what means village? And they'll go Kijiji. And I often call them Watoto Wazuri, which means beautiful children. So I mix it in and do a lot of call and response. And I find that they not only like learning new words, but sometimes I'll use a word and I'll see a kid's eyes light up because it's from his native language. You know, so that's just an extra. Yeah.
And Baba.
No, I like the call and response you said about. And I like things that this word means a village. What's a village? It's adding interaction in with your audience. That especially if you do it several times, it's a way of the thing. I think, and the fact they've grasped it and they can go back it's kind of shows that you're building that bond with your audience using something that could be quite obscure, and it's not something to be frightened of. Don't underestimate your audience, regardless of their age group.
Exactly.
Because sometimes adults can be lazier than children.
I do the same stories to drunk bikers at 2:00 in the morning as I do to primary school children.
Yeah, I think children and adults in the same way too. And adults like that. They like being, they like being introduced to new stuff, just like kids in a way. It's rediscovering themselves in a way.
Right. Well,
the thing I find interesting is
sorry.
Have you heard of a thing called Horrible Histories? Horrible Histories was this amazing way of telling children about history by basically talking about poo a lot. But the adult version was less accurate and less fun than the children's version. And it was kind of saying, because it was just really sad, the idea that adults needed to be pandered to more, but I don't think they do. It's just that is that sometimes children are more interested and you can kind of get away with more, but adults need to have fun as well.
On that, babe, someone who protect. Sorry, David, were you about to say something?
The author are really that the story for the now or that what everybody there.
The same stories. Everybody likes a story.
No.
David, could you put your camera so we can see more of your face? Sorry. There we go.
Hello. Everybody out there are really that they not know what story are.
If you're deaf, so a lot of deaf you don't know what a story is.
I don't find that necessarily true. I've performed before a lot of deaf audiences, sometimes with and without an interpreter. But I like to have fun with my deaf audiences because
I've certainly performed to people who
I perform to deaf audiences, and sometimes they'll have an interpreter. So what I will do, if I know that there are significant members of the deaf community in my audience, I do jokes that are only for them, and nobody else gets it. But the interpreters, I've been blessed to work with some wonderful interpreters, and I'll tell them, and every now and then I'll play a joke on the hearing impaired. Like one time, the tech was doing the sound tech on me. And so I signed, well, I don't sign well, but I signed that I was going to play a joke on the tech person. And this is what I did. I said, when you are, and I can, the show. And he's doing, I said, no, don't rush yourself the show. And now the deaf audience is cracking up, they're cracking up. And the audience began to gather on what I was doing. I told him to take off his mic. I said, no, I'm playing a joke on you. Please don't mess me up when I do my performance. Because I learned early, a director can fire you. Tech people can make your stuff go wrong. So always be nice to tech.
Right. Before
ways of getting back at you.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think the people who taught me most on that were a group of adults. A resource center, adult resource center, and I had a mixture. I suppose broadly, it was a mixture on extreme autistic spectrum, and then a lot of with Down syndrome adults, but they were communicating really. They were doing a mixture of speech and. Do you have Makaton in America?
You have to define
as a very simplified form of
sign.
Hold on, David.
That the ladder that go where
it's a good way. Yeah, it's.
But in America, that
In America, it's a different sign. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway,
in America, we have ASL, which is American Sign Language. But we also have BSL, which is not as well known anymore because this country used to be extremely segregated. And so Black Sign Language developed. You're still there in some rural areas, but for the most part, because now they are desegregated, not integrated, desegregated the populations, a lot of the Black Sign Language has faded away or it's only known in certain pockets.
And on that, Barbara, see, now you've gone into the history of science. You know, it's a wonderful segue into how you use bring history alive through story, which you've just done. You know, well, David brings up sign language, or how do we do stories? How do we make stories accessible to deaf people? And suddenly Babasi gives us a whole history lesson of sign language in America. So I'm going to hand over to you. If everyone else can mute besides Babasi. Oh, sorry, Claire, were you going to say something before we move off?
I was just going to say, it's often the same thing to deaf people as if you're telling a story to a group, most of whom can't understand English. It's you basically make it so that the rhythm of the story and your movements are entertaining of themselves, and the fact that they're not getting. I once told a story, and someone who was, I think, French turned to someone else and said, I don't know what she's saying, but I'm really enjoying it.
Well, on that note, real quick, because I know John's trying to introduce me, but real quick, I as a favor for one of my patrons, many years ago, I performed for a international summer group where the kids were from all around the world. Some of them spoke English, some of them didn't. The purpose for being in the United States was to get a crash course in speaking English. And I picked this young man out of the audience to be my brother Rabbit. And he did everything I asked of him. And afterwards, one of the people from his group pulled him aside and he said, "You know, you did a wonderful job with him. He doesn't speak English, but everything you asked him to do, he did." Because it's the rhythm and the mannerisms that often compensate for the language. And then in that same time, I did as a favor. It was my birthday. I usually don't perform on my birthday, so I was sang happy birthday in 5 different languages and got 5 different cakes. Yum.
And I think finally, you set us off on a magnificent tangent there, David. It's brilliant and a really important one. But in schools, I mean, I think it's important not to be shy about asking. If I've got a huge group of, if I'm working to several classes simultaneously, I always ask if there's anyone there with hearing difficulties and ask them to be put in front of me. So I can make sure that they can read my lips. And also I wear a lot of stuff around my neck. I have to take that off because if I'm wearing a microphone it just goes clang clang for the pulpit. Yeah, David.
That right now we did that for never.
I think, have it as a topic for a Monday. I think that'd be great, David. And if you like the, I think we can not just for deaf, but for how we make stories more accessible, stories and poetry. And if you can bring your poet friend and anyone you know into that discussion, I might just give it to you that night to organise, David, rather than.
Accessibility is a really vital thing. It's kind of, we're talking about making stories from the past accessible, but that's the same thing as making stories from now accessible to people who have often been excluded from them. And it's the same techniques, I think.
So I think I'm just gonna. David and I, and possibly Jackie, will have a conversation. I'm not saying that you rely on Jackie, but I do. And we'll plan a Monday night just around that subject because it's a huge subject. It'll probably go on like the history one for several Monday nights. Right. So I'm going to leave that to you, David. Fantastic, well done. It's great because I run out of ideas anyway. Baba C.
Yes.
Yeah, because Baden, I put tonight on Baden's Facebook page because because it's his fault, and so I thought I'd just take over his Facebook page for tonight, and to remind him because he's. Right. Doesn't matter how much I insult you, I still want that bottle of rum when we get together.
Sorry I couldn't join
Okay.
earlier, guys.
Hey,
to be here.
I find that amongst people who really understand each other, sometimes the best compliment is an insult. Because it's, as long as it's not done viciously, you know. But so and I love rum. I
Oh
really
God!
do.
Oh God! Where are we going to meet? Middle of the ocean or somewhere?
We're going to work it out.
Is that right? Anyway,
as long as it's not in the plan. Yes.
Have a seat.
Only got to.
Yeah, you're how you bring history alive through story. You've given us 1,000 directions already, but if you could.
Well, because I do it in many different ways. One way is the way I dress, and sometimes the way I dress, we have a dialogue on the way I dress, because I don't wear hats. I wear kufis and crowns. This is a crown. It's supposed to be sitting straight up, but I have an earphone on, so I tilt it to the side. My robe is called a buba. Well, actually, it's called a boo-boo. But in the United States, a boo-boo is something you try not to step in. So we call it a buba. My entire thing, the robe, the blouse, the shirt, and the pants, the ensemble is called an ekbata. So we have a conversation about that. And I usually have more stuff around my neck. I will wear what they call I had a brain fart, as the kids would say right now. But anyhow, so that starts up. But the other thing is this. When I tell stories, it's like getting people curious, because when I come out to an audience, they have no idea what's going on. The way I'm dressed, sometimes I have a djembe, a drum. I have this tall staff that commands authority. So the way I tell stories is to spark curiosity. And then I may ask a few questions, because there's this horrible concept that African American history begins with slavery. It does not. I may be a DOS, descendant of slaves, but my heritage began before there was America. And so sometimes I do that. But the thing is, I'll ask them about reading and writing and rapping. And I have a story that deals with that too, because if you like to read, if you like to rap, if you like to sing, if you like to dance, you're telling a story. So sometimes I say, and telling a story, if you're reading an older story, it's an exercise in learning a new language, because a lot of the words we don't use anymore, like Shakespeare. In this country, you tell the average kid, you do think about Shakespeare, it's like, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? I've seen Shakespeare translated into American, and it gets the kids really wrapped up and involved. So my whole thing about shaping and telling story is to spark curiosity, to use language that maybe the audience isn't familiar with, and to use some humor, because sometimes you are talking about a very serious subject, but you release some of the tension with a little bit of humor. And I encourage people to read. I encourage them, because one question I get asked, especially by younger people, and by younger people I'm talking about the little ones, the Watoto Wazuri, the beautiful children, and I say, well, I do something that I'm going to encourage you to do. And they go, what's that? I said, to read. I said, I read, and something else. I talk a lot, but I also know how to listen. So, one story can have 1,000 different ways to say. Every time I tell a story, there are probably at least 20 different verses to it. And I might tell one, and that, and then that one verse I may reinterpret. But I never change the essence and spirit of a story. If I have to translate it so that essence is gone, I will not do that story. So I don't know. I think I answered your question. I'm not sure. You're muted, John. Unmute, John.
I'm there. And Claire has told a story. Dave has told a story. Obviously, can we have a story? I just do these things as an excuse to get people to tell stories.
Well, I tell you what, can I squeeze 2 stories in? Because I want to do one, because Claire reminded me of something. And I wanted, Claire left. Oh, she did say it was a bit dodgy where she was. But I wanted to tell a story that Claire reminded me of. And Claire, I was telling a story that you reminded me of. You talked about the fox. And in American history and African American culture, there are a lot of fox stories. And there's a lot of coding that goes on in African American languages. Even though it changes from generation to generation, there's a lot of coding that goes on. So ordinarily I would tell kids, I said, I'm about to share a story with you.
The Fox has such a rich history.
Yes. And I tell them, I'm going to tell you this story. And this story, there are two characters. There's a fox and there's a goose. One of them is us and one is not. Can you tell which is which by the end of the story? Now, this story has a lot of coding going on because it goes back to when you couldn't tell everybody everything. And a lot of times you had to appear to be telling a story when you were really sending a message. So this is the way the story goes. It's about the goose, sister goose, and the fox. You see, a long time, and my accent will change because I borrow southern accents sometimes. So a long time ago, you see, before there was electricity and before people had them electric stoves and all that kind of stuff, people lived out in the forest or they lived nearby and they had simple pleasures. Like Sis Goose loved to go swimming every day in the pond. Now the pond was public pond, it belonged to everyone, and Sis Goose would go swimming. She'd go, honka, 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 honka. That's not the way goose sound, but I can't do that noise. Anyhow, honka, honka, and she just loved to swim. But Bro Fox didn't like to swim, and he stood on the edge of the forest, and he was looking at Sis Goose and going, oh, Sis Goose, you think you're so cute. You think you're so pretty in that there pond, but when you come out, I'm going to grab you right your neck. I'm going to pluck the feathers off your bones. I'm going to eat the meat off your bones, and then suck the bones dry. Well, soon, Sis Goose got out of the water, and just like Fox said he would, he grabbed her by the throat. He said, I got you now. I'm going to pluck all the feathers off your body. I'm going to eat all the meat off your bones, and then I'm going to suck your bones dry. Fox grabbed the wrong person. Sis Goose was a southern lady, and she didn't take to that. And she smacked him with, she said, I don't know what your problem is, going around grabbing people by the neck, talking about you going to pluck the feathers off their body and eat the meat off their bones and suck their bones dry. Don't you know I'll take you to court? Now, this is back before the time that certain folk could take certain folk to court. And word spread near and far and near. I'm usually interactive, but because of time constraints, I'm shortening the story. And people gathered around because it was rumored Sis Goose was taking a fox to court. And so Sis Goose, she waddled down the path, honka, 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 and she waddled her way right into the courthouse. And when she got there, she got a little nervous because Bro Fox was sitting next to his lawyer, who was a fox. She looked at the jury, and they were all foxes. So she looked at the judge for some compassion, but he was the biggest, fattest fox you ever want to see. Well, sir, Sis Goose laid out her case. The jury debated for a minute and a half. No, that's not right. It was 90 seconds. And they found her guilty of swimming in a public place. And all them foxes descended upon her. They plucked all the feathers off her body, ate all the meat off her bones, and then sucked her bones dry. Now, I educate with the stories I tell. And so one of the lessons in the story is, if you use a goose and find yourself in a courtroom full of foxes, don't expect too much justice. Or like my Aunt Amelia would say, child, if you's a goose and find yourself in a courtroom full of foxes, baby, your goose is cooked. So, then at the end, I would ask him, thank you. I would ask him which one is us and which one is not us. And see, that's sometimes you have to play that because it's about the lesson. It's not about causing derision in the people in the audience. So, that's what I do. But the last thing I want to do, or the other story I want to do, it's not my story whatsoever. Sometimes I just like being silly. No, not you. Sometimes I just like being silly. And this poem is by that famous author called Anonymous. I'll let that sink in for a moment. And I love this. My father told this, and allegedly his grandfather told this. But the name of this poem is Two Dead Boys. And some of you might know a version of it. And it goes like this. Ladies and gentlemen, skinny and stout, I will tell you a tale that I know nothing about. The admission is free, so pay at the door. Now pull up a chair and sit on the floor. One fine day in the middle of the night, two dead boys got up to fight. Back to back they faced each other, drew their swords and shot each other. A blind man came to watch the fair play. A mute man came to shout, hooray! A deaf policeman heard the noise and came to stop those two dead boys. He lived on the corner in the middle of the block in a 2-story house on a vacant lot. A man with no legs came walking by and kicked the lawman in his thigh. He crushed through a wall without making a sound in a dry creek bed and suddenly drowned. The long black hearse came to cart him away, but he ran for his life and is still gone today. I watched from the corner of the big round house, the only eyewitness in fact of my fable, but if you doubt my lies are true, just ask the blind man. He saw it too. So, you know, storytelling comes.
I like that's a great poem.
Yeah, and I like just about everything I've read by Anonymous. I know y'all got that. It's very, very bad, but yeah.
I'm glad you kept it all serious, Barbara C.
Well, yes, one must,
yeah, because
especially in this august body.
Yeah, no, I think you just got it about right. That's for us all. No, it was brilliant, and you know, and I mean the goose. I mean, when you were telling the goose story, I've heard you do that before, and it's just, and it's a brilliant story. I mean, it's so clear, and you could apply it anywhere. I mean,
yes.
It's obvious, you know, it applies utterly where it came from, but you could take that and transpose it. You could, I mean, Dave could take that and to a Tudor court or something, and you know, Dave could take that same story and change it, and it would apply there. If you're in Rwanda at the wrong time, it would apply there.
I mean, in any period the idea of injustice seems to be immortal.
And folk tales in general are poor people's stories.
Yeah.
You know, sorry, Claire.
There's just the things. The tales of Robin Hood seem to be very much. They became very popular at a time where people were getting such injustice. The only place they got justice was in stories.
Yeah.
I have the question to ask
Teresa, unmute yourself. And
yeah, I just want to say about Bubba's story, I love the way that you said, you know, who are you in this story, because I think that, you know, we're all guilty at times of you know, being in a group and going along with the group idea. And I thought that was a really clever way of actually showing kind of, you know, a different aspect to the story. So thank you. It was really great. I loved it.
The pleasure was mine. The pleasure was mine. Hey, Dave, how do you pronounce your last name?
What, me? Yeah,
yes.
It's Tong. A lot of people assume it's Tongue, but it's not Tongue. Although it probably does come from Tongue originally, but it's Tong. Yeah.
All right.
Pong, as I used to find out at school quite a lot. Anyway.
That's why when I like to get people's names right. Sometimes it takes me a moment, but Tongue, not tongue. Yeah. Tongue.
It's taken from a village where it comes from, a village of Tong in Kent, which apparently takes its name from a tongue in the river. So it's gone from tongue to Tong. And so anyway, but yeah.
All right. Thank you. You just educated me.
I'm just interested in the goose as the, you know, I'm just thinking of the time that the amount of times geese or goose turns up in American folk literature. You know, it's you know, not just you know, there goose gets eaten, but you know, there's, you know, in a song like Old Grey Goose, you know, and it's whatever they do, it's sort of
the goose that laid the golden egg.
You can't defeat it, you know. I mean, when they, you know, they put it in the pot, they boil it for 10 days, you know, like they boil it for 10 days, you know, and then it's last seen flying across with its goslings behind it, you know. It's whatever you do, you know. If you're great, if you identify with the goose,
it's interesting how
throw whatever you like at me.
Have a bigger tradition, like.
Go, Claire. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. It's interesting how certain animals seem to have bigger traditions, like fox and geese really seem to have huge traditions everywhere.
And the rabbit.
It just seems to be certain animals.
And the rabbit, geese, foxes, and mice.
Yeah.
And I've never understood.
That's why Fables works so well, because we all associate. You don't have to actually, if you ask children what a fox represents, they'll tell you straight away. Sly, wicked, all of those kind of stereotypes. And you can, again, it's why they do work, because it seems to be innate, you know, in people. They understand, you know, rightly or wrongly, a pig is greedy, you know, and all of those things that you can actually build on, or you can play against in some ways.
One of the things I liked about the fox and the goose story is that it can be used for different. It can be used to address injustice. It can be used to address bullying. It can be used to address different cultures. It's a very universal story. It's an African American story, but it's a very universal story. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, no. I was just sitting. I was thinking at that point of African tricksters, because you were saying why the stories, you know, of of hare, spider, and
sometimes monkey,
and dog, you know, but they're all creatures that interact with human beings, and you know, and go. I mean, one possible. Sometimes you don't have to look too deep for explanations, you know, because you know, turning, you know, Babasi going back, you know, a few generations, would be wandering from village to village. The honourable Babasi, when he turned up at a village as a Gruit, would be, you know, would be a revered character, and there will be, as well as the musician, will be expected to tell stories, and you know, when if you read, if you know the writer of the book, and you look at a character, and people say, "Oh, he's talking about me." Well, you can't have human characters in the story, because you know, the only, as well as being the revered and honourable Babasi, you've also got to be fed when you get to that village, and you don't want to annoy people in that village. So if you turn over to animals, you can't. No one can say they're talking about me.
Exactly. In the American South, when the aunt or the nana or the taint Margaret, but anyhow, taint has a different meaning now. But when she's telling stories, and she comes to your house and he's telling a story, and they talk about animals that just so happen to have a name similar to yours, and just so happen to have a behavior similar to yours, and they tell the story, and in the story they talk about what you need to make it right, and they tell the story, and the person gets up, "You're talking about me," and she would say, "Child, did I say your name?" "Well, no." "Then I couldn't possibly be talking about you, now could I?" So that's
it goes back to the idea of the fools, how the fools got away with telling truth to power, because they hid it in innocence. Often you would have these people who either are natural fools or artificial fools, who had this allowance that they alone could say things that would get other people killed.
Well,
and sometimes they were the ones who were pushed forward to say it. For instance, a huge, great defeat, you would get the fool to tell the king, because anybody else was going to get in a lot of trouble for telling that. So it's that innocence sometimes of being able to get away with things because you've done it innocently.
And on the flip side,
you can actually see it everywhere, because actually, even if you go on something historical like the Bayeux Tapestry, which is the big embroidery that was made to celebrate the Norman conquest just after, 1066 and all of that, of course. And actually, if you go and look on the border, you'll see the same story represented 3 times, and it's a very simple story of the fox and the crow, where the fox entices the crow by being nice to it to sing, so that it drops the cheese.
There's a
Of
phrase,
course,
yeah.
then the fox.
Yes.
But the point is that's represented 3 times on there, and people are still arguing to this day whether the fox represents William or it represents Harold, who had taken the English throne at the time, or whether it's the other way round. And the point is, you can impose anything on that you want. So some people say the fox is William, he's the baddie for stealing the throne. Some people say it's Harold because he took the throne from William. So that's the beauty of stories. Everyone is able to impose their own view on it. It's not for us to decide what they should think. We just give them that chance to think about it, and and hopefully they'll come to some wise decision. You never know.
And sometimes you want to guide them toward a specific, and other times you want to leave it. And I tell a few stories where I never answer the question of what the story is about, but I do ask the audience what their interpretation, what their take on it is. One thing about the griot is the griot is charged with always telling the truth, and the griot is probably the only person that can tell the Oba, the king, things he doesn't want to hear, but he knows he's hearing the truth.
Yeah.
And they're not allowed to touch or harm us. But you are right about the storytellers. In the old days, storytellers and also priests, or no, what do you call them? Preachers. They traveled from town to town, and you had a responsibility. You fed them, you gave them a good place to put their head at night, and then you fed them in the morning and sent them on their way.
Yeah. And in Ireland it was Shonackies. But I'm on that audience thing. What I'm going to do, I'm going to ask those apart from the 4 of us, everyone else unmute and ask questions to anyone or any one of our 3 guests, Dave, Claire, or Baba C. So if anyone's got any questions, we could be here till midnight, but that's okay.
Just don't ask me about Kentucky. I'm not allowed to talk about that. No, okay. I'm just kidding.
So Hannah, Mike, Baden, and Teresa, and Jan, the rest of us shut up for a minute till the question comes.
Boy, I don't even know where to start, but I'm going to ask Babasi a quick one that I was going to ask him last time. But, greetings, everybody. Dave, good to see you, man.
Hello, Dave.
I wasn't sure I was going to make it tonight. That's why I didn't jump to be part of it. And I was right. I finished work late, so I'm just about here. But Babasi, there's something that I've always been a bit curious about. And it's this character of the signifying monkey. I keep hearing it come up and I keep catching bits of it. When we talked last time, I was going to ask you, could you say something about the genesis of that, where it fits in an African American culture?
I can talk about it, but then I have to do it, and I have to do a shortened version of it if that's allowed. Please, John, say yes. Thank you. Okay, so the signifying monkey. The signifying monkey represents, well, it can represent different things. First of all, he's a trickster. He's a troublemaker. He is a person that engages in what is it for he said, she said stuff, and the signifying monkey will sometimes borderline tell you the truth, but usually if the monkey's talking, you know how you can tell he's lying? His lips are moving. So the signifying monkey, and there are different versions. Like I required my students, I had a youth group, and I would give them assignments. And one of the things was to go look up signifying monkey because we're going to do it in a performance. And they came back to me and said, nope, we can't do that. I said, why? We cannot do that. I said, why? They showed me the sites, and there's some really XXX versions of signifying monkey. But the signifier, okay, so real quick. Remember, he's a troublemaker, right? Said the signifying monkey to the lion one day, there's a great big elephant down the way. Going around talking, I'm sorry to say, about your mama in a scandalous way. Yeah, he talking about your mama, your grandma too, and he don't show too much respect for you. Now, you weren't there, and I sure am glad, because what he said about your mama made me mad. Signifying monkey, stay up in your tree. You are always lying and signifying, but you better not monkey with me. Well, the lion said, well, I'll show him. I'll tear that elephant limb from limb. So he shook the jungle with the mighty roar and took off like a shot from a 44. He found the elephant where the tall grass grows and said, I've come to punch you in your long nose. The elephant looked down in surprise and said, boy, you better pick on somebody your own side. The lion didn't listen. He made a pass. The elephant slapped him down in the grass. Baden, I said grass. The lion roared and sprung from the ground, and that's when the elephant really went to town. I mean, he whipped that lion for the rest of the day, and I still don't see how he got away. But he dragged off more dead than alive, and that's when the monkey started signifying jive. Signifying monkey, stay up in your tree. You are always lying and signifying, but you better not monkey with me. Well, the monkey looked down and said, ooh-wee, what's this beat-up mess I see? Is that you lying? Ha ha, do tell, man, he whooped your head to a fare-thee-well. He gave you a whooping that was rough enough. You're supposed to be king of the jungle. Ain't that some stuff? You overgrown pussycat, don't you roar, or I'll hop down there and I'll whoop you some more. The monkey got to laughing, jumping up and down when his foot missed the limb, and he plunged to the ground. The lion was on him with all 4 feet, gonna grind that monkey to hamburger meat. The monkey looked up with tears in his eyes and said, please, Mr. Lion, I apologize. I meant no harm if you let me go. I'll tell you something you really need to know. The lion stepped back to hear what he had to say, but the monkey scampered up a tree and he got away. The monkey looked down and said then, what I wanted to tell you was, if you mess with me, I'll sink the elephant on you again. The lion looked up and said, you jive. If you and your monkey children want to stay alive, up in that tree is where you better stay, and that's where they are to this very day. Signifying monkey, stay up in your tree. You are always lying and signifying, but you better not monkey with me. You talking to me? You better not monkey with me. I ain't the one that got beat up. You're always lying and signifying, but you better not monkey with me. So that's the signifier. And you may have noticed sometimes I said tree, sometimes I said twee, and I usually do that. And someone said, why do you say twee? I said, just because someone talks differently than you doesn't mean they don't know what you know. It just means they talk differently than you. In some language, there is no TH sound, which is why in a lot of the African diaspora, you'll hear people say dis, dat, and day, because there's no TH sound in their native tongue. Just like Asians often have difficulty with L's and R's when they first learn English, but knows how I phrase that. Okay, so you get a lot of dis, dat, and the other, but it doesn't mean they don't know what you know. It doesn't mean that they're not educated. I've heard professors from the islands who will say dis, dat, and day, and sometimes they have to catch themselves and remember to say this, that, and they, and other, not other. But anyhow, that's the signifying monkey.
I just got to come.
In the no, wrong story. Go ahead.
Well, it's just a little bit of stupidity. I knew there was an African-American surrealist poet by the name of Ted Jones who was around at the sort of beat poet with Ginsberg, and I got to know him quite well. And he came up to the university in Norwich, and what cracked him up was there's the train station before Norwich is Dis. And
that is the truth.
Yeah, he said, I've been to this place. It cracked him up, but I just sorry. That was
I just want to say really quickly, because I've heard so many references to it and people quoting it. It's one of those things where there's a kind of assumption that the knowledge is common and everybody knows what it is, but that's the first time I've actually heard the whole thing put in context. So
that's one of the, and that's a more family friendly version.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Is that story? I've read medieval and earlier versions of that story. It's such a ubiquitous tale that seems to spread around the world and spread around that time. Though all those little bits of here of the trickster setting someone involved with somebody else, then getting to come up and get away, and then mocking the person. All those little aspects. It's amazing how that seems to be a story that just doesn't get old. And it's been around for forever and will be around for forever.
And I'm always amazed at how many different versions there are, especially the, shall we say, adult versions. But and it's a sister song to Straighten Up and Fly Right, which I cannot do for you right now. But Straighten Up and Fly Right involves a vulture or vulture. What's the other? It involves a vulture and a monkey. And it's called Straighten Up and Fly Right because the vulture tricks the monkey to getting on his back so he can take him up in the sky so he can play with the clouds. And then the vulture tries to do in the monkey. But it's a story about, it's also a story about leaving the South because you have to straighten up and fly right, which means get the heck out of the South if you want to have opportunities and live a better life. So it's a song that talks about trickery, people deceiving folk, people overcoming challenges, but there's also a coded song and story about leaving the South. So maybe later I can do that, but I don't have the pipes for it today. I can only sing 12 days out of the year.
Yeah, so yeah. Well, you keep coming back and visiting us, Baba C, because you're gonna. We'll exploit this friendship. Baden will tell you I'm really good at exploiting friendships. So.
But you do it with such charm.
So yeah.
I intend to be a regular. I'm learning to adjust my schedule so that I can tune in more often. I have a challenge with my schedule because my challenge is at the mercy of my potential clientele, and so it's never. I very seldom have the same schedule.
Well, I wish you're a clientele that becomes more than potential. Right now, okay, we'll have another question, maybe for anyone. I mean, but.
One of the things that's come out of all the really good storytellers tonight has been the fact that they all use rhyme and rhythm so beautifully. Because I had a strange experience once of having a primary school ask me to do a Jamaican story. And I was very unhappy about this because I knew I couldn't do an Anansi story true justice. But I found a Jamaican friend of mine who was very shy, but she still came along. And I told the story in straightforward English narrative. And then I turned to her and I said, you tell it in patois. And she did. And the rhyme and the rhythm of it just took the story off into another dimension altogether.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the secrets of even Dave's storytelling tonight, particularly, you notice the way that repetition brought that story. The one about the monk brought that story very much to life.
It's funny you should say this, Jan. I don't want to interrupt, but what's interesting with this book of Trickster Tales is that actually looking at some of the, I love Trickster Tales over here. They're very rich and developed. When you look at the Trickster Tales, say from places like Jamaica and Africa, they can be pretty basic. And what becomes clear is that it's all in the telling of those stories, that they're not really meant to be put on paper. Because when you read them on paper, they just...
No. And I find it ironic that people...
That patois and all of that, the rhythm and all of those things that you do to sell that story, isn't it? You know?
And I find it ironic that those of us engaged in the oral tradition have to write things down for prosperity. And about rhythm, I have no rhythm.
Isn't it though?
But thank you very, very much.
Isn't it though that someone's put somebody's skeleton down on paper?
Yes, and that's exactly what bare bones is what we would call.
I think about like taking it out of the freezer and we thaw it out and put it back in our mouths.
Not taking the bait. Not taking the bait. But as far as rhythm is concerned, they say some people march by the beat of a different drummer. My drummer quit. So
I want to come back on with Jan on a thing, because it is most storytellers tell stories from, you know, even they'll grab a story from somewhere in the world because they like the story. When it comes, we take, because of all the baggage and everything, and and guilt and all that stuff, we get very shy about telling, you know, if you're white English, telling a Jamaican story or something, and a Nancy story. But I don't even try. I tell it in Essex, because, you know, but I introduce it by talking about, you know, Nancy's taken from Africa, usually and across the ocean, and then rabbit as well. The hare is taken and becomes rabbit in America, and actually becomes you know, rabbit even goes to Hollywood and becomes Bugs Bunny, you know, because Bugs Bunny's roots are in those stories. And then I say, you know, but people came from Jamaica and back across the ocean to Southampton or Tilbury or wherever, and the stories became part of us, because, you know, like the stories travel with the people around. So I'll do it. And so, you know, for instance, if Nancy's talking to Queen Bee at the top of the tree, I go into, you know, I go, "Hey, Queenie," and that's
hey, Queenie. Okay, excuse me.
Yeah.
Oh, real quick, Jan, Claire, and Dave, thank you very, very much. I enjoyed your different styles. I enjoyed the twinkle in your eyes. I enjoyed the smiles you may not have been aware that you were giving. And I like the way your cheeks kind of get color to them. I hope that wasn't offensive. Get color to them. When I blush, you can't tell. Okay, so, you know, and Dave, I love your backstories and your stories. I mean,
thank you.
One of the things I really like about this cafe is I can hear the connection between the different types of stories, but I get exposed. I get exposed to your takes, your rhythms, your background, the way you tell your stories, and Baden, or as I call you, Bad N. I'm fascinated by you too. You need to reach out to me on Instagram because I've been trying to catch up with you. But anyhow, I'm just fascinated, and I don't want to leave anybody else. And but you know who the biggest storyteller here is? John. But don't tell him.
No, I've told nothing but the truth
I
my
thought he
whole
was
life.
losing weight.
Pardon?
Say it
I
again.
thought you'd lost weight.
No, I wish. But
Teresa wants to say Teresa or Teresa?
Yeah, Teresa, you were going to say something.
Well, I was going to say a few things actually.
You're allowed.
Well, I've just
Do
again.
you have a cap for that feather? Do you have a cap for that feather? See, feather in your cap.
Well, I picked it up because I've got a lot of feathers and it's a goose feather, so it's appropriate to pick it up. So there's a few things I just wanted to say, and firstly, thank you, because it's been really fascinating again, and I agree with Jan about, you know, and Bubba, listening to the different rhythms, and I found it really interesting that my kind of thoughts about historical stories have been shifted by today's conversation as well. And I never would have thought about using fables as historical stories, but of course they are. And I just want to say as well, Baba, when you were talking about this and that and all of that, you reminded me of my dad actually, because my family are from Ireland, they're Irish, and my father spoke Gaelic. And when he came to England, he mixed up his T's and his thes. So I was always called Theresa because instead of Teresa. Yes. And the River Thames instead of the Thames. And everyone was tall and tin and not thin, you know. So it was fascinating, and I loved the take that you had on that, because people do make that judgment of others about the way they say things, and if people mispronounce or pronounce things in a different way, and I love that, and I've just taken so much from each of you, actually. And Dave, I don't know if you remember, but the last time you were going to do a course in Oxford, I actually
the other.
you about that. So when those are on the go again, I'd love, because Oxford's near to me, so that would be great.
You know, I will sell it.
And Claire, you sort of started me with the fox story. I just, it just really never occurred to me that was historical, and that you've just opened the world up to me. So I really appreciate that. And John, I mean,
those stories.
John, again, you've just done this wonderful thing about curating this fascinating conversation, and you are a star, really.
I reckon John's.
I have to say, John deserves a round of applause. He needs a whip to keep us in line.
So you've all been incredibly well behaved. I was very disappointed about that, but
it's not like herding cats at all, is it? Honestly.
Well,
I never understood that. I heard cats several times in my life. I heard them outside my apartment. I heard them outside my house. So what's the big thing about herding cats?
You don't have any choice in the matter.
You all the time.
Thank you, Jan. And on that visual aid, and on one more appalling joke from Babassi, which do come back and tell more of them. No one.
I
want to earn my button.
Hold on, Claire was trying to get in there. Come on,
the puns just don't stop, even though maybe they should.
I have been trying to stop my puns. My best friends pulled me aside and said, listen, we don't mind you doing your puns. What we object to is sharing them with us. So, but I have tried not to be punny.
You know what?
I'd rather... Go ahead, Claire.
Introduce you to some friends of mine who have an equal kind of pun behaviour.
Hey,
you could leave all three of you in the room, and the rest of us could leave it.
I'd rather be funny than puny. I'm going to close this down because okay, yeah, Mike. Yeah, well, it's just because Mike hasn't got his microphone working tonight, so or it's going to be here for another 3 hours. Because
I want to earn my button.
Did you have any questions, Mike, for the chat? No, that's okay. But the person who does need a huge round of applause is sitting in Marrakesh and just having to listen to us for an hour and 40 minutes so far. So Ali, thank you. You have taken your magic carpet across the world as per usual. Thank you, Ali. Big round of applause.
Thank you, Ali.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Thank you, my friends.
Great night.
Well,
thanks everybody. Babassi, good to see you again, Monday.
The pleasure is always mine. You and I got to do something together.
It's been a joy.
And we are having sometime in May. There will be Bringing Histories to Life Part 3, and I've got. Hold on, 2 seconds.
Part 3.
The return. Part 3.
I was going to talk about using books to tell stories, but we didn't get a chance.
Well, maybe next time would be good because I'm having as one of the guests Bronwyn Riley, who wrote Journey to Britannia, and so I need to put it later in May so I can be sensible when I talk to her, and I actually have read the book.
Ironically, they have books on audio tape. I love it. Oral history, audio tapes.
Yeah.
I love audio tapes.
So, anyway, we've got Bronwyn. David Thompson will be back with us from Austin. And who wants an invitation back for that one? Okay. Right. So, So we might have a huge panel. Now, Ali, I've just got to apologise because the next one might be a 3-hour session.
No, it's okay, John.
Okay, right. Good night, everybody. Good night.
Thank
Really
you,
good to see you
thank
all.
you very much.
Safe
Right.
journey.
All right,
Go have lunch.
You are home.
Lovely. Enjoy.
Okay.
Oh, you're not
Thank you,
driving,
guys.
are you? Bye-bye, everyone.
Night.
Bye bye.
Night.